So, welcoming you to this deeply personal session that I wanted to have with anybody who follows my work, who loves what I write, who agrees with my way of looking at life and growing in life. And one of the most profound ways that I have found growth and fulfillment in life is when I actually started connecting with my ancestors, and not just intellectually, not just by knowing about them, but by allowing myself to believe in their presence, to believe that I can connect with them if I really want to, and they are there looking after me, looking at me, no matter what I do, where I am. So when I was ready to bow down to their presence and not intellectualizing it at all, it was then when I started, finding that growth that I was always looking for. You finding that doorway that led me to select choices that helped me finally, and I stopped making destructive choices for myself. And it's pretty illogical. And I would like to begin with one of my personal stories, one of my own experience of knowing and coming into this work also, and connecting with ancestors, what it has given me. And I will talk about one ancestor specifically today. However, I have found connection with many of my ancestors, and each is very special in its own way. Okay, so, but I would really like to talk about one specifically because it has a very big umbrella of impact in my life. And so the story began for me when I turned 22. And I came to know through my cousins one day that my maternal grandfather, my Nanaji, had a marriage before he married my maternal grandmother. So until 22, I did not know of this. I did not know that somebody else exists before my nani came into picture, my grandmother came into picture. And that day, it only was a momentary shock of a thing, but it did not really impact me consciously, right? It did not impact me consciously. However, it was a uh, very weird sort of a feeling in that moment. I was not in this journey. I did not know the meaning of systemic conscience or how it works. So it was the first time when I came to know that she existed. So I asked my mom and I told her that, why didn't you tell me and tell me about this and what happened to her, what happened to her, and why don't we talk about it? So she told me that it was after 2 years of their marriage, like my maternal grandfather and his first wife. It was after almost 2 years of their marriage when she was pregnant with a baby. She was almost 7 months pregnant, and she was trying to cook something, and there was an accidental fire, and she, along with her baby, were fully burnt in that fire. And that is how her life ended. And with her life, the family of my maternal grandfather also ended. He used to work away actually from the town in Rajasthan. That was the video that you were talking about. It was the same ground actually where this happened. And it was to honor her only where I went there and I connected with her. So coming back to the story. So my grandfather, he used to work in a distant town to get money, and he used to visit his home once in maybe 1 year or 6 months. It was like that. So he was not there when this incident happened, and he was immediately called. And she was in a lot of pain, and she survived for another 15-20 days, and then she died. And the whole story, it made my eyes go really wide. But I took it as a story, and I did not know the kind of impact it can have on me, because it happened like way before I was born. Who would even think that it will impact me, right? So at a conscious level, even then, I did not know whether this has any link with what I am going through in my life. Like, that is the furthest thing that I could have connected. So this was the second layer when I came to know about her. And that's it. Okay, these are the two incidents, and that's it. And I was going about in my life, and it was in 2016 when I had to go through my own abortion. It caused a massive shift in my personality. Like, I could not imagine why did that happen. It was very odd, and nothing that I was planning for. And it's not like even that my sexual life was active or anything at that time exactly, but it was like the forces worked in a way that the incident happened, and the whole event, it caused a massive shift within me, to the point I broke up with my partner after that. And I started looking for someone who will not who will help me go through this pain. So I started looking for another partner. I did not know anything about therapy or anything about, how to get over this grief, because we intellectualize grief. We don't really sit and feel it. So I used to have all my reasoning and logic in place, and I used to think, this is why I did it, this is what happened, this is the reason. But I did not know that there's something which exists beyond my personal conscience, beyond my will of doing something, beyond my desires and planning. Because for the longest time in my life, that's how I have lived. I have planned, I have followed my plans, and I have got results. But there came a time in life where nothing was going according to my plan. I was not getting results according to my plan, and I was not even able to put my focus into my plan, you know? So I realized that there's something which is,
Sorry, disconnect हो रहा था, so I used to come back again. Please go ahead.
no worries, no worries.
Please go ahead.
So I realized that, so I was saying that how nothing was going according to my plan, and one after the other, things were happening that I was trying to avoid by adding other layers, like finding a new job, finding a new partner, finding ways of getting more money, more parties, and all of that. So I kept myself busy to simply avoid the grief that was already bestowed upon me, and that was already there within me, somewhere within me. And I kept on intellectualizing it, I kept on giving logic, I kept on giving reasons, until after my marriage, when I was completely depressed, and I could not get up from my bed. That was my situation, where I would cry, I would eat, I would like be in one spot for not just days, months. And there would be a screen in front of me, like the TV screen. So I would scroll, watch some content, binge watch anything. I would eat. And even then, I would find a way to blame my partner for whatever is happening with me. And I did not think that something within me requires my attention, and I need to work on myself. And I did not know the concept of working on myself back then. And this was in 2018, 19. So it's not very far back. And that's how I realized, now when I look back, I realize how growth is not linear at all. When your time comes, when your shift comes, it just comes. And it's up to us in a way whether we are ready to dive into that shift, and whether we are ready to dive and surrender to the greater presence, which is beyond our will, right? So what does it mean? Why am I saying this? What does it mean that a greater presence is there beyond our will? And how do we then make choices? It becomes so difficult to understand that. So I finally realized when I looked at my partner after 6 months of my marriage that it's not him, it's not his fault. Whatever is happening with me is something that concerns with me. And I started looking for therapy. I started looking for consulting. And it was after 2-3 rounds that I met with Dr. Gaurav, the common link between us, right? So I met him for the first time in 2019, early days of 2019. And in my very first session, during at the end of the session, so he did some inner child work with me. And during the end of the session, there was something that led me share the story of my grandfather's first wife and how I ended up telling him about how she died. And he just told me one line that you have a link with her. And you got to see that. And I heard that, but it did not make sense to me at all. I came back home and I was like, I don't know what that man was saying, and I'm not going to go to him again. And that's freaking me out. But the thing is, I felt relief after that session for the first time in years. That was not all my logic was against what he said in the session. And I come from a very logical family, very practical family. Nobody in my family has even knows about this kind of work that I'm into. So what he said did not make sense to my system, not just me, the system that I've grown up in, the beliefs that I've grown up in. Those beliefs were just coming up in defense in my head. And they were telling me that, this man, whatever this is saying is not making sense. However, the feeling that I had was one of relief, and I could sleep that night. And I was like in a state where I haven't slept for months. And so I decided I'm going to visit him again. I decided no matter what, I'm getting relief. Forget what he's saying, I'm going to go to him. So that's how my journey started. That's how I trusted my mentor when I heard the truth, but I did not know how to logicalize. And I trusted on my feeling more than what my thoughts are telling me, because thoughts can go haywire. It can completely go haywire, right? So that's how my journey started. And I had various constellations, when this particular ancestor would show up. And there were moments when I had deep realizations of connection with her, but it did not make sense. Until very recently, I would say, it did not make sense. And I continued my journey, no matter what. I continued. After so many experiences, I could finally realize how I have been unknowingly the carrier of that unprocessed grief that has been in the system for, I calculated, for 65 years. 65 years is from the date when she died till now. Like, I calculated this date 1 week ago. And I was so amazed at how number of years, number of days, it does not matter. If something is unprocessed in the system, even if it is a story that doesn't belong to you, that happened way before you were born, and it is there in generations before you, but if it was unprocessed, if it was ignored, unacknowledged, it has a way to travel down, and it has its own ability, its own will, actually. So, it's a very famous, how Dr. Gaurav always tells us in the systemic medicine course that a system is made up of many parts, but the whole has a power which is greater than the sum of the parts, So I always get fascinated at how it acted through me without even my knowledge. Forget my willingness or permission. It happened without my knowledge, because it doesn't seek your knowledge, your intellectualism. It seeks to be acknowledged, it seeks to be included, and it seeks to be processed even long after those people have gone. They have left us. But so typically, what happened after she left, after she left, in 20 days, my grandfather was engaged to my grandmother, the lineage where I come from. So that happened after 20 days of this incident. And it's observed through various constellations that I have also done, and I have seen my teachers performing. It has been observed, Paramita, that men typically turn away from grief. They simply don't talk about it. And Dr. Gaurav often gives this example that how you can compare it with a log of wood. It's like it's impossible to get words from their mouth after something like that has happened. And mostly such heavy events, they are buried and they are not talked about. And often they are simply replaced so that it can be forgotten. And I'm not saying this as a wrongness of anybody. I'm just saying this as something that happened in my system. And this is how they coped from it. This was the best that they knew at that time. And the whole family, the whole lineage of my mom, my grandmother, my grandfather, where I come from, 50%, it comes from this unprocessed grief. And anytime before I became aware of this, I was not conscious of this earlier. So what happens when we are not conscious of this will? We try, unknowingly, we try to adapt to the same coping mechanisms. We also try to look away. And even women back then, what they used to do is they used to simply sink in a black hole sort of a thing. And they would just repress that. They will feel hopeless, they will feel desperate sometimes. And mostly what we have seen is when somebody loses a child, the solution that is offered is go for another pregnancy. When somebody loses a partner, the solution that is offered is go for the next partner. And it's not a wrongness to move and select a next partner. However, using it as a coping to avoid the grief, now that remains suppressed, and it has its own ability to travel further down generations, and it can happen for 7 generations. Like we have seen a case that went up to 20 generations. So it's not linear, like I told you. When I look at my, Nanaji's story, it happened 65 years ago. How can it impact me? How is it logical? It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. But as of today, it makes so much sense to me. Like I have no words to put it. And the kind of connection I feel with her, like in this moment, I know they are somewhere behind me, and they are guiding me to say whatever I'm saying. And I feel their connection and inclusion in my heart as of date. And I never knew something like that is possible. And it is only when I started using this, consciousness, when I realized that, okay, I am connected to the grief and I'm somehow a carrier of this grief. Now I have two options. I can either stand and blame everybody, that why didn't you process it earlier? Why did it come to me? This is wrong, this is right. So I can keep on intellectualizing it. Or I can sit with it. I can choose to feel the pain so that I don't have to use the same coping mechanisms. I don't have to look away when grief comes to me. I don't have to feel suppressed and bogged down as if I don't have a voice whenever grief comes. A similar thing happens with anger as well, you know. So I used to realize that my system shuts down when I'm angry. I cannot get angry. You know, it's like my body will not know how to embody anger. And it used to happen for the longest time. Like, you know, even now I struggle a lot with it. But now I've had instances where I've embodied and I have tried to live it. But earlier I thought of it as a wrongness. Like it's a complete wrongness to live anger in any way. And anger is also a form of grief. So grief is a broad umbrella which can be felt as anger, as sadness, as fear, as hopelessness. And when it intensifies, we are diagnosed with something like depression, with anxiety, and that's where we stop. We don't realize where does it come from? What are the stories that have created this depression in my life? And we end up thinking of it as a wrongness of us. We end up thinking as if, you know, I am so scared, I am so sad. However, that's not your identity. I used to think of it as my identity for the longest time because I was a pretty sad sack, you know. I used to cry at nights and I would not tell anybody about it. And I used to do that so much, especially I remember in 2015, 16, those were like a couple of years when I used to just cry at night for hours, and then next day morning I'll get dressed up and I'll go to office like nothing has happened and I've slept well. And it will catch up, right? All of these things that you hide from your own self because you don't want to show it to anybody, those things, they are impacting us. They are impacting you. They are impacting me. So I realized all of these things. Uh, and I used to do that as a child when I was 8 years old. Like my legs used to ache at night. And I used to not tell my parents about it because I didn't want to disturb them. And now when I look back, I realize that all of my experiences from childhood till now was actually about dealing with the residual energy of someone else's fate. And it was not exactly my fate that I was living at during those moments. Because if a child is bothered with pain, it will go to his parents. It is going to say them. But what I was living was a pretty heavy, unprocessed grief that had no language. And I thought of it as something that I am for the longest time, that, you know, I am like this and I become sad and it is a wrongness of me. And I spill sadness everywhere. And, you know, I used to feel that for a long time. I used to see everybody else is sleeping and I'm not getting sleep and I'm feeling like crying. And how do I make sense of it? And how do I tell it not looking weak? Because you don't want to look weak. So I realized how I was inculcating both of my Nanaji's and Naniji's story, first wife, where he kept looking away, you know. And I remember my mom telling me when he was at his deathbed, you know, when my Nanaji was at his deathbed, he told my mom that he was remembering his first wife. And he told her that, you know, I don't know what kind of life she lived. And I feel so bad about it. And he also told her about how he has not been able to be there for Naniji, really, my Naniji, you know. And that was his moment of realization on his deathbed. So either I can think of it as a wrongness of him, or I can think of it as his fate. as his journey, and I choose the second. It is everybody's fate that is impacting each other because we are part of a system. And until we realize and allow ourselves to bow down to that power and become conscious of how it is impacting us, we won't be able to know where we are and what are we carrying and how to include it without feeling as if it is a wrongness of me. So grief is actually, at the base of grief is actually a lot of love. I feel it is a love of me for my Nanaji, for my mom, for my mom's system, because this is the system that comes from there. And it is my love that knows no borders, that knows no, it doesn't require permission of my knowledge even, that this existed. I did not know for the longest time, but it still impacted me in my entire journey. As of today, I acknowledge her. Her name is Vimla Devi. I acknowledge her as one of my most, most important spiritual guides in my journey, you know. But 2 years ago, her thought used to scare me. I used to get weird dreams of fire, and I used to get scared even in the kitchen when I used to, hook. How do you, when you switch on the stove and there's fire, and I was so scared of going in the kitchen because that's the place where she was. She got into that accident, you know. So all of these things that I've lived all my life, because being a girl, getting married in a Marwari system, a girl who is scared from fire and does not want to enter kitchen, it's a big deal, you know. And however, I'm dealing with all of this, and deeply inside of me, I'm doing all of this in order to include her somehow, in order to bring her story alive somehow, in order to tell her that she's included. But I did not know that. And all of those toxic ways, they shifted when this became conscious in all of my work, whatever I've done, my sessions, my own inner work. Finally, when I realized that I'm really connected to her, and all of my life is, all the dots are connecting, all the experiences are somehow linked to their story. So I finally realized that I am linked to the fate of this particular event, and the energy, it still travels in my body. And as of now, what has happened for me is I'm able to recognize when it shows up. And I don't have to use unhealthy ways or go look for something to consume whenever it shows up. I simply embrace their story whenever it shows up, and it calms me down. So that's the medicine that helped me, not the medicine that was prescribed for, say, depression, or, the pill that I can take, maybe. So yes, those things can help balance your compositions, your biological requirements a little. But going to the root of what's happening with you requires a lot of compassion for yourself, a lot of observation without judgment, and a lot of willingness to surrender to a power that exists beyond logic, and a power that is taking care of you without you even knowing. Because when you are loving your system so much without even knowing, without even logicalizing, you will get that love back. And the only thing, the only beauty that happens with becoming conscious is I don't have to think of it as a wrongness of me. Like now, when I put the stove on in my kitchen, I see fire and I smile and I remember her. And I'm like, everything for me has changed. Now I can look at a bonfire continuously for an hour And I think of it as a positive trance now. Instead of thinking of it as something that was scaring me earlier. So the fear was because of the unprocessed grief. The anger was because of the unprocessed grief. And when I allowed myself to grieve, like I literally allowed myself to sit and imagine and grieve the whole incident. And I also, I actually bowed down. I seek blessings from my Nana ji and from her. And I told them that your family is also included. Just because somebody has left us does not mean that their position can be taken by anybody else. Everybody has their own position and everybody seeks inclusion. And until everybody is included, the system will try to balance through somebody in the further generations. So if you are, by any chance, because you're listening to this and you are part of this space, and anybody is going to listen to the recording and they are part of this whole circle. So if you are listening to this, know somewhere, just a second. Yeah. So if you're listening, please know that love seeks to include. It seeks inclusion over generations, over any timeline. And when we become conscious of it, we can actually find a way to honor by not living their fate, not living a half life, but honoring them that allows us to live a full life. It's like when I live a full life, I invite them to see that, see, I'm living this. And I know you would have wanted this for me. I know you wouldn't have wanted me to live a half life or a heavy fate. And that happens when you sit and process that feeling, when you acknowledge your position, what you are carrying, without thinking of it as anything wrong. It's not a wrongness, it's love. It's your love for your system. Even if the environment where you have developed, where you have grown up, even if it was not secure or in a way that you wanted it to be, even then, love does not require that. Even then, you will feel a inherent love because it's just there. It just exists. And there's a whole new opening of possibilities that open up, when we are ready to just acknowledge what we have, what we are carrying, and how can we process it instead of fighting it, instead of avoiding or fighting it, find a way to process it and take ownership of your own life in a way where you become the creator of your life. You include whatever seeks inclusion through you. So observe, get coached, work with a therapist, whatever it takes. Like there was a point in my life when I really came to know that, okay, all this is governing my life. I decided to just surrender. I left everything. So that was pretty abrupt. But it was, again, my spiritual guide. It was her, in a way, I feel it, that it was her strong energy because it impacted me so much. She guided me to dive into it right away when I was ready, without logic. Like my whole family was against me when I was choosing this. And I had no money because I left my job. Anyhow, I decided to somehow ask for money. Like I really became vulnerable. I was not convincing anybody. I was just requesting. I was like, please, can you please just give it to me? And I will return it back to you. And it took a lot for me to embody that kind of space, because I am a person who is very resistant in asking, who has always been a giver, who has always seeked to give. And when all of this happened, I started learning how to ask. And not just from people, you know, asking whatever I want in life, I simply ask the universe to guide me. I simply ask my guides to guide me. And I spent my last 4 years in learning how to create space to connect with that power, you know. And now when I see, I think 3 years, 4 years are what? They are pretty much like very small, even though it felt like very long. But now when you put it in linear time, it doesn't feel that long. It feels it was a pretty much decent time for me to come to this realization finally. And now I can own my choices. I don't have to look at somebody else and think that my life is wrong because of them. I don't do that anymore. I don't feel the need, actually. So all of this will be an emergent property of you acknowledging what you are carrying and finding a way to become conscious about it. Otherwise, you will live it in the form of, like I said, fear, desperation, hopelessness, anger, and it will keep on continuing in a cycle. Okay. So I would like to thank my ancestors. I know they're all here and helping me, in helping you in whatever way you are here to get that. And I would request all of you to close your eyes and imagine your ancestors from both sides, okay? From mom and dad, both sides. Imagine your ancestors standing behind you, okay? Standing behind you, and try to visualize as many as you can see, as you can feel. And imagine their blessings coming to you from behind in the form of support, strength, in the form of courage that you need, that you might need to own your own reality, to acknowledge your experiences, to validate your experiences without any approval from others. Receive their blessings to drop judgment for yourself for anything that you experience in life. Know that you are loved, you are supported, and you are blessed in every moment, in every breath that you take. That is the reality of their love. Okay? And it is when you open your hearts and you bow down to their presence and you show the willingness to include them in your heart, you will be guided, you will be shown the way that you are looking for. So just try to open yourself up without logic and breathe into this beauty of their presence. Yeah. Okay. So that was from my end. Anything that you want to ask or any takeaway that you would like to share? So Paromita, would you like to share something?
How did you finally आप release कर पाए सब कुछ आपका release हो गया or you are still carrying something of it?
So it is not a quantitative process. It is a very organic process. Like grief is also a very organic process. ऐसा नहीं है हर दिन आपको एक जैसा feel होगा, right? Every day comes with its own nuance. So for me, something or the other used to happen, you know, because I was so much into this work and I was so much into knowing about the stories of my past that in some session, in some thing that I'm doing at home, I would realize something coming my way, some knowledge coming my way. Like there was this whole celebration at my home, and that very day where everyone was very happy and dancing, I had this whole embodiment of grief, and it happened very, very suddenly. However, I was able, in that moment, I was able to know why it is happening because I was aware of what I was going through. Otherwise, it would have been looked at as a panic attack, maybe. But since I was conscious, I was able to navigate myself and come out of it. And I could tell everybody that, hey, it's fine. I'm good. In fact, it was a release for me. And every time anything like that happens, I realize that the grief is coming down and the potential to live fully is coming up. So organically, it's happening. And I would say the intensity that I was living versus what I live now, there's a profound shift. Like I have changed as a person. So I don't know how much, whether it's left, whether it's gone, but I am at a place where I have grown so much that I don't care. Like I know whatever will come, I will be guided. So I have stopped doing that calculation of, whether it's fully gone or fully there. I don't know actually. I'm observing as it is happening, and I'm making myself more and more conscious about what's happening with me without judging. So that's all you need to have, an attitude of not judging and observing and letting your journey unfold organically instead of thinking of it as a task that I have to complete by this date. No, you can't. Like for me, I would have told Dr. Gaurav to just take it out of my body after one session. But he would laugh at something like that. Like it's whatever can be released and whatever you are ready for, that will show up automatically. You cannot force it. And that happens typically in every regression session. Whatever you are ready to look at, you will be guided by the forces and you will be taken there. So I don't keep a check like that anymore. Like, does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense what you were saying. I'm just thinking about my journey and बहुत resonance हो सकती है. The same thing is with my Nana ji. He also married twice. So that is what
Okay.
I was just thinking. So it makes so much of
Yeah.
sense. So I was like, wow. I mean, I was not. पहले I am the crazy one. I feel it this way. Shame
Yeah.
आती है when you were, you know, but now of course
Yeah, and it took so much for me to even know her stories. Like I would ask somebody and they would be like, nay, nay, I don't know, I can't say much. But then as I was becoming ready, her story started becoming visible to me. Like one of my aunties, my mom's sister, she actually one day told me about her pregnancy. Like my mom did not mention her pregnancy. And one day I realized, okay, so my abortion, so it was in one of my constellation for abortion when her energy showed up in one of the representatives elements. And it was then when I started inquiring in my family that whether she was pregnant, whether they were expecting a child. And somebody said, no, it was a 1 month thing. Somebody said, no, nothing. But then I realized that there was a stillborn. Like one of my aunties told me that there was a stillborn and it was a full 7 month pregnancy. And then when I asked other people around my house that I came to know about this, they all agreed, you know. It's okay.
No, it's absolutely makes sense. जो आप कह रही
So,
हो.
so all these stories, and the secrets, like the secrets that are kept, the stories that are hidden, they somehow carry a lot of residual energy because they are unprocessed.
True.
But when we set up a constellation, when we become aware of these hidden dynamics, it helps us.
It
you know,
absolutely. How many sessions have you done?
as in
Family constellation?
there's no count anymore.
Half,
Like I have
half.
surrendered my life to it since 4 years now. And like since I wanted to become a trainer, I did the course for constellation 3 times, like the trainer course. And so I have no count.
I mean, you paid 3 times for the course.
No, I watched it 3 times. Like I did it 3 times. Whenever Dr. Gaurav used to do it, I used to just tell him that I'm going to do it. And yeah, I paid more than once for sure. you know so that's why I don't have count now. It happens visually. Like I close my eyes. I've practiced so much that I close my eyes and I imagine the field, and things happen for me and I become the observer sometimes. So
How,
now so it happens, when you just don't count anything. No years, no sessions, no number, kitna bacha hai, how much is left. Nothing of that will make any sense. Just be present, be who you are, love yourself, and honor the way you have loved your system. Maybe it was through grief, and who said grief is bad? It's actually deeply profound that I'm making space for the grief to process itself. And it can be very, very respectable when I allow myself to respect myself. Okay, so the crazy ones, like you said, the crazy ones are often the carriers of grief of something that has happened even before they were born sometimes.
before born? Because now people are not even alive. And
Yeah, these people are not alive, and sometimes you can go through a very big trauma in front of your eyes, and that can be very, very triggering. And sometimes nothing of that has happened in your conscious life, but you still feel that way.
oh, you do. I mean, nothing
Yeah.
has happened, and you are wondering that why it is what why you are going through. Suddenly, you go out of your body types experience of it.
Yeah, and it's time to honor that and learn tools to process it, instead of thinking it's a wrongness of me or rejecting yourself for it. That's the last thing. Don't, like, I should not say like this, but don't do that. Don't do that. Find a way to just honor your experience, whatever it is, beyond good or bad. And that has helped me profoundly. Like when I dropped judgment of what's happening with me and I started helping myself, it made the entire shift very, very visible, because you have to decide for yourself. You need to know what you're going through. It's nobody else's journey.
True.
Yeah, so I'll honor my journey. I will not wait for somebody's approval to honor my journey, right? So that's what I've learned, and that was my intent in sharing my own story, because it's something that I've realized beyond any logic, any timeline. And it helped me surrender to the greater forces that are always here. So my wish, like we are almost at the end of the year, so my wish for anybody, for you and anybody who's going to watch this, is you find your connection to your ancestors, and you find a way to honor your journey. You find a way to bring wisdom in your life that will help you in your journey, instead of judging yourself or thinking of it as something wrong.
True.
So that is my wish for anybody who's going through grief that is illogical. It doesn't have to make sense, but it is still your journey. And if it is your journey, you got to respect. And that will happen by becoming conscious, by finding a way. And finding a way requires your willingness to help yourself. It doesn't require you to give logics and reasons. It doesn't require that. Okay.
Exactly. It's like including everyone. You belong.
What?
That is
Sorry?
just including that everyone in your system, जो आपने कहा, which has
Yeah.
actually to process so much.
Wow.
और जो कहा कि कि बहुत difference है, so of course I have experienced that. So I
Wow.
was very amazing when you were saying, the same almost similar story hit me.
Yeah.
Wow, I thought I only had that story. I said, wow.
Yeah. So see, we feel accompanied. I feel accompanied when you share your system's information, and when I share mine, we know that we are connected in a larger pool, even when we consciously did not know until yesterday, right? So this is how we are connected to our systems and also to further systems. Now that I'm ready to co-regulate and share my story, and I'm meeting people automatically who resonate with it.
Absolutely.
So I have found a different way to deal with this grief. So I got my way, and just like that, everybody will be given their own way when they are just willing to be conscious of it instead of getting scared and feeling it as something wrong. you know that will help. That will really help.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Thank you so much for
Great.
sharing.
Most welcome. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for including me in your system's story in a way. And I'm deeply grateful to your presence. Like, I could do this uh, because of your presence today. So I'm deeply grateful. And I'm sure this energy will guide you and help you in whatever way you need resolution right now. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.